Well, welcome to the latest lecture in the series on the Tiger tank. My name is Bruce Oliver Newsom, and these are the lectures on the Tiger tank. And in this lecture, we're going to answer another question, and the question is about the main armament. How accurate was the 88mm gun in the Tiger tank? This is a really interesting question and a really tricky question. So up front, I'm going to tell you how I'm going to do this. So I've got to tell you where I'm going to find the evidence, what sort of evidence I think is appropriate. There are competing forms of evidence. There's not just one way of measuring accuracy. There's different measures and there's different sources of evidence. So I'm going to talk about the sources for my evidence in a moment, but let's just analytically list the types of evidence I think we should be interested in here. So the first thing is we're just going to look at the design of the whole tank from the platform upwards through the gun. We want to look at the design. So how is it designed and how do these design choices influence the accuracy of the gun? It's not just about the gun because the gun is sitting on a platform. So we need to look at how the platform was designed and how that impacts the gun, and then look around the gun, look at its operating systems and think about how they would impact the accuracy of the gun too. So the design, we can take some inferences from the material evidence that survives in surviving tanks and look at the documents of the time and take some inferences from its specifications at least, and then perhaps some competing choices by comparison with enemy tanks, say, we might clarify how the Tiger performs. So the design. Then secondly, we want to look at how the gun sights are gradated, because most gun sights are gradated to a certain range. So they're gradated to a maximum range and then with finite ranges, finer ranges, range intervals up to the maximum. And we can infer from the maximum that that is a recommended range or a useful practical range. However, there may be some sights which are gradated way beyond what is a practical range, and I'll show you some competing examples of that. And it may even be the case that the range is gradated much shorter than what would be possible with the gun. And in fact, there's some evidence, not in the sights, but there's some evidence even for the Tiger that its recommended range was not as long as the users found it to be. So we're going to compare sights across different tanks too to make sure that we can state the Tiger's range in a comparative sense for its time. And thirdly, we're going to look at something called the effective range, which is a really tricky term to use because it's used in many different ways. That's true today, and it was certainly true during the Second World War. So for the purpose of this lecture, since we're focusing on accuracy, we're only really interested in what is the maximum effective range at which we would expect the gun to be accurate. And there are competing ways about what threshold we would take as accurate. What we don't want to look at is effectiveness in terms of penetration of different targets' armor or destructiveness against different targets' armor. Those will be subjects for other lectures. So effectiveness in terms of range is often expressed against other tanks, competing tanks. So what is the maximum range at which we would expect a Tiger to kill this particular enemy tank? That's not going to be the subject of this lecture. We want to focus on accuracy. So we want to focus on that meaning of the term. It's the same term, just to focus on accuracy. So what is the maximum effective range or a probabilistic range at which we expect to make first round hits or third round hits? There are different ways of getting this effectiveness measure. That's the focus here. So let's separate effectiveness in terms of accuracy from effectiveness in terms of penetration and destructiveness, which, as I say, we will cover in different lectures. So that's effective range. Now, fourthly, we want to look at something called opening range, which is also often neglected in the literature. It's routinely neglected. We can take inferences about the accuracy of the gun from the range at which the users typically open fire. So if they have confidence in the accuracy of the gun, you would expect them to open fire at longer ranges. And we're going to make some comparisons against other guns because those comparisons will give us a relative sense of the accuracy of this particular gun against its competitors for the time. So opening range is an important factor, or I should say an important measure for accuracy as a whole. And then fifthly, we're going to look at grouping size. So traditionally and conventionally today, when we measure the accuracy of a gun independent of its other systems, at least, we're going to clamp it down and fire some rounds against the same target and try to keep the conditions the same for every shot and look at the grouping size, and that's going to give you an accurate measure of the gun's inherent accuracy. And it's very difficult to find grouping data from as far back as the Second World War, but I've actually got some data that I've discovered in the archives. I'm going to show you that. There is another sensor grouping where we take into account the other aspects of the operating system of systems around the gun. And with tanks, we're, practically speaking, we're more interested in the grouping size when we take into account all those other systems, and that's what we're going to focus on. So we're actually not going to look at any data on the gun in isolation, because that's not the question. The question is how accurate is the gun on the Tiger tank. So we are going to look at groupings as produced by the whole system as a whole, right? So the system of systems, incorporating those operating systems and other factors. So those are the 5 measures I'm going to present to try to answer this question. Now, I did say I'd look at the sources or show you the sources. So first of all, we can look at the specifications of the time. We can look at our measurements of the surviving material evidence. Those are specifications which we can confirm by our own measurements, and that will be particularly useful for analyzing the design in itself. Then we'll also look at technical intelligence, because some of the German specifications and design expectations are lost to history, so they were captured on documents that have been destroyed, or the persons, the principals who were involved at the time were killed, or they were never interviewed, or they never cooperated with the Allies, and they destroyed their documents. So we have to triangulate what we know from the German evidence with the foreign evidence, so the enemy evidence, which is essentially technical intelligence from analysis of the Tiger tanks that were captured. And because so much evidence, German evidence, was destroyed, either deliberately or by Allied bombing and Allied war making inside Germany itself, there is some aspects of the Tiger tank which we can get only from enemy, that means Allied technical intelligence, because the German information has been lost to history. So we do need to incorporate that, and we'll get some triangulation from the Allied test of Tiger tanks with German specifications of Tiger tanks. So that's the second source. Now we're going to look at German policy and doctrine for using the Tiger tank, so recommended ranges and things like that in policy and doctrine. The recommendations are not necessarily practically true, so the users can dispute what is in the policy and doctrine for a recommended range, and we'll see some examples of that. So policy and doctrine should not be relied upon. It's another source. It should be considered a complementary source, not a sole source. This is why history should be as evidence-based and comprehensive in its sources as possible, so we can triangulate the knowledge. And fourthly, I'm going to show some user experience. So that speaks to point 3. Sometimes the recommendations for how to use a weapon are not the best recommendations as the users would find in battle. So policy and doctrine is largely theoretical. It can be proven experimentally, but the ultimate test of policy and doctrine is battlefield experience, and it's ultimately up to the users to tell us what is an accurate weapon and in what ways it is accurate and at what ranges and so forth. So we're going to triangulate all those sources together to try to get the best or most accurate knowledge about the accuracy of the gun in the Tiger tank. Right, so let's move on. So I have to tell you the evidence sources, the analytical scheme here, because this is a complex subject and I want you to be prepared for it. So let's start with the design of the Tiger tank as a whole. Now there are 4 aspects to this essentially. So we're going to look at the design of the platform. So the platforms is independent of the gun. The platform provides either stability or stationary stability or moving stability or stability at different attitudes of the platform or not. And that's going to be a relative quality. I'm going to see how stable a gunnery platform, the Tiger tank, was. And then we're going to look at the gun's accuracy itself, or what design aspects of the gun should suggest that it is accurate or not. And then we're going to look at the ammunition, because the gun may have its own design capacities, but that doesn't mean that the ammunition is utilizing those capacities. So we'll look separately at the ammunition, and there's some technical explanations to be made there. And then we'll look at the operating systems around the gun. So the operating systems, such as the gun sights, they can contribute to the accuracy of the system as a whole. So if the gun sights are clear and they have good magnification, if the turret is stable, if the gunner's position simply is comfortable, those sorts of aspects are going to contribute to the overall system's accuracy. So it's important to incorporate all of these aspects in our analysis.
To continue to watch the whole video, go to patreon.com/Bruce Oliver Newsom.